Hello, welcome to my tour. My name is Sally Hurst. I'm a neurodivergent, disabled textile artist, ceramicist and poet. I'm mainly based at Venture Arts, which is a supported art studio for learning disabled and autistic artists. I started off researching William Dodd. William Dodd was a disabled Victorian factory worker. What was special about William Dodd was he could read and write. Most Victorian factory workers couldn't read or write because they didn't go to school. William Dodd wrote 3 books. I read 2 of them. The first book was about his own life, and the second book was about other disabled factory workers' lives. William Dodd was also an advocate. He campaigned for the 10-hour-a-day bill, so no one was allowed to work longer than 10 hours a day. At the time, people were working 16 to 18 hours a day, so this was a big deal. In William Dodd's second book, I focused on historic Lancashire. Bridget Lyons was from Manchester, and Mary Brown was from Wigan. This is my Irish sea weave. Bridget Lyons was described as an interesting young Irish girl. I made this weave using a wavy shuttle. It was important to me that I supported Irish businesses for this weave. I used flax, hand spun by Charlie from Ireland. Irish flax is used to make Irish linen. I also used Irish Galway sheep wool. I was inspired by Lowry's seascapes. I went to the Lowry Art Gallery in Salford. I noticed he used neutral colours to paint the sea. It still looked beautiful and looked very much like the sea, even with a limited colour palette. So I used a limited colour palette too. Neutral colours with hints of greens and blues. When Bridget Lyons arrived in Manchester, she worked as a piecer. Fixing broken threads together. Once whilst working in the mill, she was picking up waste cotton she found on the floor. So I weaved using waste cotton. I got the waste cotton from Helmshaw Mill. Whilst picking up the waste cotton, her clothes got caught in the machine. So I weaved a Victorian half apron by cutting the apron into a long, thin spiral shape to make yarn. I painted it with fake blood. To show she was injured. From being spun around by the shaft. Bridget Lyons ended up in hospital. The red fringe shows her blood vessels and flesh and blood. It's dark and grey to show not much has happened. From being in the hospital for 38 weeks. She lost both her legs. I used horsehair sutures to stitch onto the next bit. This is because Victorians used horsehair to stitch wounds together. They also used catgut. But I didn't use catgut because it's dissolvable. Bridget Lyons is now disabled with no legs. I don't know how Bridget Lyons felt about her disability. So this is more about my own experience of disability. At first I was embarrassed and shy of my disability and disability aids. I used to crop out my disability aids out of photographs. But as I grew, I started to like my disability aids. I was no longer advocating for a cure, but for better accessibility instead. You'll see there are crutches and a wooden leg. Bridget Lyons could walk with a pair of crutches and a wooden leg. I wove the disability pride flag to show we accepted our disability. I used industrial shades of colours for the disability pride flag. Bridget's masters felt guilty about what had happened. So they got her an 18-month apprenticeship as a dressmaker. I wove this weave using an old tape measure. I attached a Victorian chatelaine to this weave. A chatelaine is like a big Victorian keyring, but with useful tools attached to it. We don't know what happened after the 18-month apprenticeship. Did she continue as a dressmaker? Or did she have to stop? This is the end of Bridget's story at 19 years old. At 63 years old, she lived in the workhouse. This weave looks like a shawl to keep her warm in the workhouse. This weave is very dark in colour. This weave is to show things were at a low again. The crutches are broken. To show she has given up and is falling. The workhouse is now North Manchester General Hospital in Crumpsall. The hospital still has this sign up from when it was a Victorian workhouse. It says, "The poor and needy, the Lord care for me." At the workhouse, she worked as a fruit hawker. So I taught myself to naturally dye with fruit. I dyed with bark and leaves from fruit trees. I also dyed with the fruit themselves. I used traditional English fruit such as cherries, apples and plums, as they are the most common fruit during Victorian times. Natural dyeing felt a bit like a science experiment. Some of the colours were unexpected, such as the leaves turned the yarn yellow instead of green. For the warp I used jute, which is like a thick and stiff and is very tedious to work with as a warp. The process of weaving with the jute was very tedious, a bit like some of the jobs at the workhouse. These things you can touch. Mary Brown worked on a fossil frame. But whilst cleaning the machine, her hand got stuck in the wheels of the machine and almost lost her arm. But luckily the surgeons managed to save her arm. She could no longer work in the factory, so she made a scanty living selling cakes. I made all these arms by casting my left arm with plaster and making moulds, so I made them out of plaster and ceramics.